They smiled on red carpets, captivated millions on screen, and became immortalized as icons of Hollywood's golden age. In the shimmering haze of old Hollywood, where every star twinkled like a promise and every smile concealed a secret, a darker truth simmered beneath the glamour. The Golden Age is often remembered for its elegance, immaculate gowns, chivalrous leading men, and a studio system that sold dreams by the reel. But what if behind those dreams stood some of the most ruthless personalities ever to walk a soundstage? These weren't just stars, they were forces of nature, brilliant, magnetic, and often deeply broken. From unrelenting egomaniacs to cold manipulators, and this is a revealing journey into the worst personalities of Hollywood's supposed golden generation. These are the 25 worst jerks of classic Hollywood, and some of their stories might just shatter the way you see your favorite stars forever. Part 1. Joan Crawford, the Queen of Ice and Iron. Behind the striking eyes and regal poise of Joan Crawford was a persona few dared to challenge, and even fewer survived unscathed. On screen, she was magnetic. Off screen, she was terrifying. Known among crews as the General, Crawford ran her sets like military operations, demanding absolute obedience and sabotaging any co-star who threatened her spotlight. Those who didn't flatter her found themselves demoted, recast, or mysteriously blackballed. But the most damning allegations didn't come from co-stars. They came from her own adopted daughter, Christina Crawford. In the explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest, Christina painted Joan as an abusive, obsessive perfectionist who allegedly beat her children, cut their hair out of spite, and starved them for misbehavior. While some in Hollywood dismissed the book as revenge fiction, others who had worked with Joan found its tone disturbingly familiar. Crawford's ironclad image management made her an untouchable icon in public. But in private, even her closest associates whispered about her cruelty, her obsession with control, and her ability to charm the press while terrorizing those closest to her. She wasn't just a demanding star. She was a woman who built an empire on fear, manipulation, and the ruins of anyone who got in her way. Bing Crosby, the voice that could chill a room. He crooned America through the Great Depression and became a beloved Christmas tradition. But behind the mellow baritone and easy smile, Bing Crosby was a father many would call monstrous. While audiences saw a wholesome family man, his eldest son, Gary Crosby, shattered that illusion in his memoir, Going My Own Way, accusing Bing of severe physical and emotional abuse. According to Gary, the Crosby household ran on terror. Punishments came fast and harsh, often involving beatings with metal-studded belts. Gary claimed that he and his brothers lived in constant fear, and their father's expectations were impossible to meet. Bing, he alleged, demanded perfection, but offered no warmth. He was like a drill sergeant who never turned it off, Gary once said. Professionally, Crosby was known for being distant and cold with co-stars, often disappearing after takes, and showing little interest in camaraderie. Though never overtly cruel on set, many noted he carried an air of aloof superiority, untouchable and uninterested. He refused to engage with lesser talent and made it clear that he answered to no one. Even in death, the shadows followed him. 3 of his 4 sons from his first marriage would eventually die by suicide, and while the reasons are undoubtedly complex, many pointed fingers back toward the patriarch who projected warmth to millions, but failed to show it at home. Part 3. Frank Sinatra, the golden voice with a temper of steel. Frank Sinatra was more than a singer. He was a phenomenon. Charisma dripped from his every gesture, and his voice defined a generation. But beneath the glamour of old blue eyes was a volatile temper, fierce ego, and a trail of broken relationships, both personal and professional. Hollywood insiders feared crossing him, not because of what he might say, but what he might do. Sinatra's tantrums were legendary. He punched photographers, threw dishes in restaurants, stormed off sets, and screamed at directors. Crew members called him a ticking bomb. He once famously threatened a critic by smashing a telephone against a wall and bellowing, "I've got friends who'll take care of people like you." And those friends weren't just bluster. Sinatra's alleged connections to organized crime were no secret in Hollywood. Though never legally charged, he was frequently seen dining with known mobsters, and rumors swirled that his career, and even some film deals, were occasionally assisted by shadowy figures behind the scenes. Even in his personal relationships, Sinatra was notoriously explosive. His marriage to Ava Gardner was a battlefield of jealous rages and public fights. Friends said he could flip from seductive charm to volcanic fury in an instant. He wielded power like a weapon, one backed by fame, money, and fear. In the Golden Age, no one wanted to be on Frank's bad side. Not even the studios, not even the mob. Part 4. Bette Davis, brilliant, ruthless, and unapologetically cruel. Bette Davis was a cinematic force, fierce, fearless, and undeniably talented. But working with her was, by many accounts, a war of attrition. She famously declared, "Until you're known in my profession as a monster, you are not a star." And she lived by that motto. On set, Davis was known to belittle directors, rewrite scripts without permission, and treat co-stars with open hostility if she felt they challenged her spotlight. One particularly infamous feud was with Joan Crawford during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a production so poisoned with animosity that it became legendary. Davis mocked Crawford's breasts, called her a has-been, and even reportedly placed weights in her costume during a scene where she had to drag her across the floor. But it wasn't just Crawford who drew Davis's wrath. She allegedly had a habit of sabotaging younger actresses, spreading rumors, and pulling strings behind the scenes to maintain her dominance. She clashed with directors like William Wyler and Michael Curtiz, and while some praised her high standards, others called her impossible. Even her own daughter, Beatty Hyman, accused her of emotional manipulation in a memoir titled My Mother's Keeper. While many dismissed the book as opportunistic, those who had worked with Davis nodded knowingly. She wasn't just headstrong, she was a Hollywood hurricane that no one dared confront. Davis didn't care about being liked. She cared about being feared, and above all, remembered. Top Art Part 5, Jerry Lewis, the genius who made everyone miserable. To the public, Jerry Lewis was the goofy, lovable clown of the big screen, the slapstick king with a rubber face and a heart of gold. But to those who worked with him, he was anything but warm. Many insiders remember Lewis not as a comedic genius, but as one of the most insufferable egomaniacs Hollywood ever created. Behind the scenes, Lewis was domineering, arrogant, and brutally dismissive. Crew members were expected to work under extreme pressure, often enduring verbal tirades and abrupt firings if something didn't go his way. He berated assistants, scorned makeup artists, and clashed with nearly every director who tried to rein him in. One coworker summed it up harshly. He treated people like tools. If they broke, he just threw them out. His notorious feud with longtime partner Dean Martin revealed his deep-seated need for control. When Martin walked away from their act, Lewis couldn't forgive it, and spent decades either sulking or publicly bad-mouthing the man who helped launch his career. Even in his later years, Lewis refused to soften. His interviews were often curt, condescending, or downright cruel. He mocked female comedians, dismissed mental health struggles, and once ended an interview after only a few seconds because he didn't like the reporter's tone. For all his genius, Jerry Lewis made it clear he demanded worship, not collaboration, and he was willing to steamroll anyone who didn't bow fast enough. At Part 6, Orson Welles, the boy wonder who burned bridges fast. Orson Welles was hailed as a prodigy after Citizen Kane, a film many still call the greatest ever made. But behind the brilliance was a man infamous for arrogance, manipulation, and a trail of scorched relationships that rivaled his talent. Welles didn't just defy Hollywood conventions, he dismantled them, often with a smugness that alienated even his staunchest supporters. He was notoriously difficult on set, rewriting scripts at the last minute, refusing to follow studio instructions, and clashing violently with producers. Directors and actors alike dreaded working under his iron-fisted control. For Welles, compromise was a sign of weakness, and collaboration often ended in chaos. His ego knew no bounds. Welles frequently took credit for ideas that weren't his, minimized the contributions of his collaborators, and dismissed entire crews as beneath him. Editor Robert Wise once said, Orson wanted complete control, but had no patience to earn trust. That impatience, and a refusal to play the Hollywood game, got him blacklisted from major projects, despite his obvious brilliance. Even his personal life was littered with betrayal. Friends and lovers accused him of deceit, narcissism, and emotional manipulation. He made enemies as quickly as he made headlines, and by the 1960s, the boy wonder had become a cautionary tale of self-sabotage. Orson Welles could have been a titan, but in the end, he preferred being a lone genius, even if it meant being exiled from the very system he once conquered. Part 7. George C. Scott, brilliant, brutal, and barely controllable. George C. Scott may have delivered one of the most iconic performances in film history as Patton, but behind the scenes, his temperament was legendary, for all the wrong reasons. Colleagues and directors described him as volatile, intimidating, and borderline unmanageable, especially when the camera wasn't rolling. Scott was a man of contradictions, ferociously intelligent but emotionally combustible. He loathed Hollywood's glitz, despised the Academy Awards, famously refusing his Oscar, and rejected the idea of playing by anyone's rules but his own. This defiance didn't just make him difficult, it made him dangerous to work with. He frequently argued with producers, stormed off set, and was known to erupt into expletive-laced rants that left crew members shaken. His personal life wasn't any calmer. His marriages, including 2 to actress Colleen Dewhurst, were plagued by verbal abuse, jealousy, and rumored violence. Alcohol only fueled his temper. At his worst, he would disappear from film sets for days, leaving everyone scrambling while he sobered up, or didn't. Some admired his raw honesty. Most feared his outbursts. Director Stanley Kubrick once said he had to use trickery to get Scott's best takes on Dr. Strangelove, knowing the actor would erupt if he felt manipulated. That kind of high-stakes chaos was typical in any project involving Scott. He was a towering talent, but also a walking powder keg, and when he exploded, no one in the room was safe. Part 8. Kirk Douglas, the smiling tyrant of the silver screen. Kirk Douglas had the smile of a matinee idol and the ambition of a conqueror. Best known for roles in Spartacus and Paths of Glory, Douglas crafted an image of strength, resilience, and heroism. But behind that public facade was a man driven by ego, ruthlessness, and a need to dominate every room he entered. Douglas was infamous for his on-set bullying. He micromanaged directors, undermined co-stars, and frequently had final say on casting, even in films where he wasn't the producer. One director called him a star who acted like a studio head, and crew members often found themselves walking on eggshells to avoid his infamous temper. Female co-stars, in particular, found working with Douglas a challenge. He was known for making off-color remarks, asserting his authority during intimate scenes, and dismissing complaints with a smug charm that veiled something far colder beneath. Rumors of abuse and coercion trailed him throughout his life, especially the long-whispered allegation involving a then-teenage Natalie Wood, which, though never publicly confirmed, cast a chilling shadow over his legacy. He was a master of control, both in performance and production. But control came at a cost. Many in Hollywood respected his power, but few truly liked him. Even fewer trusted him. For Kirk Douglas, success wasn't enough. He had to win. And if someone stood in his way, they rarely forgot the experience. Part 9. Walter Matthau, the grumpier old man off-screen. Audiences adored Walter Matthau for his crusty charm and comedic timing, especially in classics like The Odd Couple and Grumpy Old Men. But behind the camera, Matthau wasn't always playing a role. He truly could be grumpy, caustic, and, to some, downright cruel. Though he had a dry wit and could light up a scene with his sardonic delivery, those who worked with him reported that Matthau was frequently dismissive, impatient, and cutting. He had little tolerance for mistakes, and even less patience for people he deemed unworthy of his time. Newcomers on set were often greeted with snide remarks or completely ignored. One young assistant director recalled Matthau dismantling an inexperienced crew member with a sarcastic rant that left the entire set in stunned silence. His relationship with Jack Lemmon, while often hailed as one of Hollywood's great on-screen partnerships, was not without its friction. Behind their chemistry was a quiet power struggle, with Matthau occasionally resenting the praise Lemmon received and being vocal about it during press tours. While the two maintained respect, there was always an edge, a battle for who would get the last word or the bigger laugh. Matthau's biting personality, cloaked in humor, made him more palatable to the public. But for those behind the scenes, it wasn't always funny. His sharp tongue left scars, and his sarcasm often cut deeper than anyone dared admit. Part 10. Laurence Olivier, the Shakespearean great with a god complex. Sir Laurence Olivier is often remembered as one of the greatest actors in cinematic history, a master of Shakespeare, a titan of the stage, and a man knighted for his contributions to the arts. But in private and on set, Olivier was far less noble. Beneath the theatrical brilliance lay a brittle ego and a contemptuous streak that made him a nightmare for anyone who dared to challenge him. He carried himself with the confidence of royalty and treated co-stars with the formality of servants. Olivier expected reverence, not collaboration. Younger actors, some of whom would go on to become legends in their own right, spoke of his coldness, his constant need to assert dominance, and his penchant for condescension. He referred to Dustin Hoffman as a dirty little method actor while filming Marathon Man, sneering at Hoffman's emotional process and famously snapping, "Why don't you just try acting?" Olivier's obsession with perfection extended to a near sadistic control over his cast. He dictated blocking down to the smallest gesture, dismissed improvisation as lazy, and reduced actors to puppets under his command. Directors who didn't defer to his artistic vision often found themselves creatively sidelined or openly insulted. Even in his personal life, Olivier's manipulations were legendary. His volatile relationship with Vivien Leigh was marred by infidelity, emotional distance, and disdain masked as civility. Friends noted that while Olivier could charm anyone, he rarely let them close enough to matter. He wasn't just a master performer, he demanded to be worshipped as one. Part 11. Robert Mitchum, the rebel who didn't care who got burned. Robert Mitchum was the embodiment of the Hollywood antihero, laconic, effortlessly cool, and defiantly nonconformist. But behind that tough guy swagger was a man whose disdain for authority, rules, and basic decency often made him deeply unpleasant to work with. If Mitchum didn't like someone or something, he made no effort to hide it. In fact, he often took pride in making others uncomfortable. Mitchum's off-screen behavior was as notorious as any character he ever played. He once showed up drunk to a live TV broadcast and winged his lines with a smirk. He openly mocked directors on set, refused to take direction, and bragged about sabotaging takes just to amuse himself. "I've got two expressions," he famously quipped, with and without a cigarette. His rebelliousness crossed lines more than once. In 1948, he was arrested in a marijuana sting, an enormous scandal for the time, and served time behind bars. Instead of apologizing, Mitchum leaned into the bad boy image, which only further encouraged his contemptuous behavior. Colleagues described him as emotionally detached and at times cruel. Female co-stars, in particular, recalled how he made suggestive or dismissive remarks without hesitation. To Mitchum, Hollywood was a joke, and anyone who took it seriously was a fool. That included the people he worked with. He was charismatic, yes, talented, undeniably. But kind? Not by a long shot. Mitchum didn't care who he offended, and more often than not, he made sure to offend them deliberately. Part 12. Joan Fontaine, the Ice Queen of classic Hollywood. Joan Fontaine, the Oscar-winning star of Suspicion and Rebecca, exuded elegance and fragility on screen, but behind the scenes, she was anything but delicate. Cold, cutting, and famously aloof, Fontaine built a reputation not just as a talented actress, but as one of the most difficult personalities in Golden Age Hollywood. Her lifelong feud with her sister, actress Olivia de Havilland, is one of the most bitter sibling rivalries in entertainment history. The two not only competed for roles, they barely spoke for decades. Fontaine once remarked, "I married first, won the Oscar before Olivia did, and if I die first, she'll undoubtedly be livid because I beat her to it." That line wasn't humor, it was pure venom. Their enmity was so legendary that it even overshadowed their careers at times. But Fontaine's cold streak didn't stop with family. She alienated co-stars, refused press interviews she deemed beneath her, and was quick to label others as incompetent. Directors found her icy and resistant to feedback. Several actors privately said she looked down on everyone except Alfred Hitchcock, whom she respected, perhaps because he shared her fondness for control. While she cultivated an image of quiet intensity, many saw her as an unrelenting elitist, someone who wielded status like a weapon and treated collaboration as a threat. Joan Fontaine may have mastered vulnerability on screen, but in real life, she made sure no one ever got close enough to see it. Part 13. Lee Marvin, the violent star with a mean streak. Lee Marvin was the face of brute masculinity in mid-century cinema, a hard-edged actor who brought intensity and danger to every role. But Marvin didn't leave that toughness on the screen. Off camera, he was notorious for being abrasive, violent, and drunk more often than not, leaving a trail of wrecked relationships and fearful colleagues in his wake. Marvin's temper was legendary. Crew members recalled him berating assistants, threatening cameramen, and disappearing from set on multi-day benders. One director called him a walking bar fight, a man who could be charismatic one minute and terrifying the next. His alcohol abuse often turned his already gruff demeanor into something downright explosive. Fistfights in public weren't rare, they were expected. His personal life mirrored the chaos. In the 1970s, Marvin was sued by his former live-in partner Michelle Triola in a landmark case over palimony, a legal battle that revealed the darker sides of their relationship. Triola testified that Marvin was controlling, verbally abusive, and emotionally manipulative. He countered with accusations of his own, sparking a media circus that painted both parties in an ugly light. Though some admired his no-nonsense personality, others saw Marvin as a deeply unstable man. Hiding behind his grizzled charm, he refused to play by Hollywood's rules, but that defiance often came at the expense of everyone around him. Lee Marvin didn't act like a tough guy, he was one, and he left bruises, literal and emotional, on those who got too close. Part 14. Adolphe Menjou, the charming snake in a tuxedo. Adolphe Menjou built a career playing smooth-talking aristocrats, suave villains, and urbane gentlemen. But many who worked with him insisted that behind the charm was a deeply vindictive, manipulative man who was one of the most politically dangerous personalities in classic Hollywood. Menjou was not just difficult, he was divisive. A staunch anti-communist, he became one of the most vocal figures during the 1950s Hollywood blacklist era. As a prominent member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, Menjou openly named names before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, accusing fellow actors and writers of having communist sympathies. This led to the ruin of many careers, including some who had done nothing more than attend a left-leaning event in the 1930s. On set, he was meticulous to the point of obsession, insisting on wardrobe changes, line rewrites, and demanding that co-stars defer to him. Younger actors were warned to stay out of his way unless they wanted to be humiliated publicly. Directors called him a saboteur in a silk cravat, as he had a tendency to stall productions with complaints or veiled threats when things didn't go his way. Worse still, his political crusades created a climate of fear on many sets. People whispered that he kept informant files and had direct lines to Washington. Menjou didn't need to shout or punch to cause harm. His weapon was influence, and he used it ruthlessly. Part 15. Betty Hutton, the blonde bombshell with a bad attitude. Betty Hutton was once the queen of screwball comedy and musical mayhem, an electrifying performer with boundless energy and a voice that could shake the rafters. But behind the effervescent persona was a woman with a volatile temper, crippling insecurity, and a talent for alienating nearly everyone around her. Directors and co-stars found Hutton exhausting. On set, she was known to throw tantrums, demand rewrites, and erupt into emotional outbursts if things weren't going her way. She frequently clashed with crew members and often refused to take direction, believing her instincts were superior to anyone else's. In one infamous instance, she screamed at a cameraman in front of the entire set for lighting her like a potato. Hutton's resentment ran deep, particularly toward other actresses who shared her spotlight. She reportedly feuded viciously with co-stars, including Vera Ellen and Ginger Rogers, and carried grudges for years. Paramount executives struggled to handle her erratic behavior, and after a series of on-set meltdowns in the early 1950s, the studio quietly dropped her despite her box office success. Her personal life mirrored the chaos. She went through 4 turbulent marriages, struggled with addiction, and burned professional bridges faster than she could rebuild them. By the late 50s, Hollywood had stopped calling. Betty Hutton was a firework, brilliant, loud, and impossible to ignore. But in the end, the blast left ashes where once there had been applause. Part 16. Wallace Beery, the bully behind the box office gold. Wallace Beery was one of MGM's biggest stars during the 1930s and early 1940s, beloved by audiences for his gruff but lovable persona in films like The Champ and Treasure Island. But insiders knew a different Beery, a spiteful, mean-spirited bully who made life miserable for nearly everyone he worked with. Beery had a reputation for undermining his co-stars, especially younger actors. Mickey Rooney once claimed Beery intentionally tried to ruin takes by stepping on his lines or blocking his face from the camera. He was known to be physically rough during scenes, slapping harder than necessary or using his size to intimidate. Off camera, he was moody, selfish, and, by most accounts, a brute. But his worst alleged offense remains one of Hollywood's most disturbing whispers: his suspected involvement in the death of comedian Ted Healy. In 1937, Healy died after a violent altercation outside a nightclub. Though never formally charged, Beery's name surfaced repeatedly in rumors that he had been one of the assailants. MGM quickly sent him out of the country to rest, fueling speculation that the studio was covering up a scandal to protect one of their top earners. Despite years of success, Beery was despised by many in the industry. One MGM staffer reportedly said, "When he finally left the studio, no one even said goodbye." His grizzled charm may have drawn crowds, but behind the scenes, Wallace Beery was anything but endearing. Part 17. Zsa Zsa Gabor, Glamour, Diamonds, and Absolute Chaos. Zsa Zsa Gabor lived for the spotlight, and she demanded that the world revolve around her glittering persona. Famous more for her marriages, quips, and tabloid appearances than her acting, Gabor cultivated an image of high society elegance. But beneath the furs and diamonds was a relentlessly narcissistic diva who left drama, lawsuits, and bruised egos in her wake. Gabor's ego was legendary. She treated cast and crew like servants, often showing up late to set, if she bothered to show up at all, and throwing tantrums over trivial details, from lighting angles to the texture of the air. One producer recalled that she once demanded a hotel staffer be fired because her champagne was half a degree too warm. But the most infamous episode of her off-screen life came in 1989, when she slapped a Beverly Hills police officer during a traffic stop. The incident led to a trial that became a circus, and Gabor leaned into it with unapologetic flair. Her defense? "I only slapped him because I had just gotten my nails done." She was convicted and sentenced to jail time, but even then, treated the courtroom like a press junket. Gabor burned through 9 marriages and just as many bridges. Co-stars described her as impossible, dismissive, and obsessed with status. Her love for luxury was only outmatched by her disdain for anyone who questioned her. To Zsa Zsa, Hollywood wasn't a job, it was a throne, and she didn't care who got trampled beneath it. Hush Part 18. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star with a sinister side. Errol Flynn was the ultimate screen hero, dashing, fearless, and impossibly charismatic in roles like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. But behind the camera, the man was a far cry from the gallant characters he portrayed. In truth, Flynn's private life was a storm of hedonism, recklessness, and disturbing allegations that shadowed his stardom until his final days. Flynn lived fast and hard. He partied with abandon, drank excessively, and reportedly hosted wild orgies in his home, which became infamous in Hollywood circles. He once bragged that he had slept with over 1,000 women, including married actresses, underage fans, and even starlets he'd met on set. The press dubbed his lifestyle the Errol Flynn way, a euphemism for debauchery. But his worst scandal came in 1942, when he was charged with statutory rape involving 2 underage girls. Though ultimately acquitted, the trial exposed Flynn's predatory behavior and created a media firestorm. Many believed his charm, fame, and expensive legal team saved him from a conviction. The phrase "in like Flynn" entered popular culture during this time, twisting public perception into celebration of what should have been condemnation. Flynn's on-set behavior didn't help his case. He frequently arrived late, intoxicated, or not at all. Directors complained he couldn't remember his lines and often treated female co-stars with blatant disrespect. Yet he remained untouchable for years, thanks to box office gold and a studio system willing to clean up after him. Errol Flynn wasn't just flawed, he was dangerous, and the sword he swung on screen was nothing compared to the damage he did off it. Part 19. Tallulah Bankhead, the wild tongue that cut like a knife. Tallulah Bankhead was a whirlwind of drama, decadence, and defiance. A Broadway darling who stormed into Hollywood with a southern drawl and a hurricane's force, she was hailed as fiercely witty, outrageously bold, and by many, downright unbearable. Bankhead didn't just break rules, she set them on fire. She swore like a sailor, smoked like a chimney, and flaunted her sexuality in an era when most stars buried theirs beneath studio contracts. But while her fearless persona earned her admirers, it also came with a darker side. She loved humiliating people in public, especially those she deemed dull or morally uptight. "I'm as pure as the driven slush," she once quipped, while tossing verbal daggers across cocktail parties and rehearsal rooms alike. Directors found her maddening. She refused to follow scripts, improvised entire scenes, and often appeared on set hungover or still drunk from the night before. Alfred Hitchcock, who cast her in Lifeboat, once said working with Bankhead was like trying to direct a lightning strike. Crew members recalled her insulting costume designers, firing assistants on a whim, and storming off set for days at a time over minor disagreements. She viewed Hollywood with open contempt, calling it a snake pit filled with sycophants and bores. And to no surprise, Hollywood eventually returned the sentiment. By the 1950s, her career had withered, burned by the same fire she had once used to light up a room. Tallulah Bankhead lived fast, spoke louder, and scorched everything in her path, including her own legacy. Part 20. Charles Laughton, the genius who made people miserable. Charles Laughton was a master of his craft, a titan of stage and screen, whose performances in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Witness for the Prosecution remain etched in cinematic history. But behind his brilliance was a man whose perfectionism and relentless cruelty left a bitter taste in the mouths of those who worked with him. To many, Laughton was not just difficult, he was tormenting. He demanded absolute control over his performances and often treated fellow actors as obstacles rather than collaborators. He would mock co-stars during rehearsals, criticize their interpretations, and even correct their delivery mid-scene. His contempt for mediocrity became a weapon, and he wielded it without mercy. One young actor said working with Laughton felt like performing in front of a firing squad. Laughton's behavior extended behind the camera as well. When he directed The Night of the Hunter, he was tyrannical and emotionally manipulative, pushing child actors to tears and berating crew members for minor infractions. He saw weakness as a flaw and made sure everyone around him felt it. His insecurities often fueled his rage. Struggling with his sexuality in a time of repression, Laughton was known to lash out, humiliate others, and bury his shame in emotional outbursts. Even his wife, actress Elsa Lanchester, admitted in her memoirs that he was a difficult, tortured man whose genius was both a gift and a curse. Charles Laughton was revered, but rarely loved, and the scars he left behind were often just as deep as the performances he gave. Part 21. Gloria Swanson, the silent queen with a screaming ego. Gloria Swanson's larger-than-life portrayal of Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard was hauntingly accurate because many believed she wasn't acting. Swanson, once the reigning queen of silent cinema, was infamous for her monstrous ego, suffocating need for attention, and imperious treatment of everyone around her. In the 1920s, she was Paramount's golden girl, draped in furs, diamonds, and scandal. But even at her peak, Swanson was a tyrant on set. She demanded custom lighting, refused to rehearse unless everyone else was already in position, and expected reverential silence when she entered the studio. Co-stars described her as icy and unapproachable, while crew members privately called her the Empress. Swanson's relationships were equally toxic. She had a string of high-profile affairs and marriages, most ending in bitterness. One scandal involved her affair with Joseph Kennedy. Yes, the father of future President John F. Kennedy, who financed one of her films that bombed spectacularly. She blamed everyone but herself. When her career began to decline with the rise of talkies, Swanson refused to adapt. She clung to her image like a lifeline, even demanding audiences address her as Miss Swanson in public appearances. Her comeback in Sunset Boulevard revived her fame, but insiders noted she seemed unaware that the film was a satire of herself. Gloria Swanson didn't just believe she was a star, she believed she was Hollywood itself. And if you didn't agree, you were dismissed, ignored, or crushed beneath her jeweled heel. Part 22. Raymond Burr, the control freak behind Perry Mason. Raymond Burr built a reputation as television's most righteous man in Perry Mason, followed by the stern yet lovable detective in Ironside. But off-screen, Burr's behavior was anything but just. He was manipulative, controlling, and crafted one of the most elaborate false public personas in Hollywood history. Burr's need for control extended far beyond the script. On set, he micromanaged scenes, rewrote dialogue, and challenged directors in front of the crew. Co-stars who disagreed with his vision were sidelined, replaced, or written out entirely. One producer remarked, "You didn't work with Raymond Burr, you worked around him." But Burr's real manipulation came in how he managed his image. He fabricated an entire tragic backstory to elicit sympathy from the press and fans. He claimed he had been married to a Scottish actress who died of cancer, a woman who never existed. He also said he had a son who died of leukemia, another complete fabrication. These lies remained part of his public biography for decades, only unraveling after his death. Many now believe Burr spun these stories to hide his homosexuality at a time when it could have destroyed his career. While that context elicits empathy, it doesn't erase the way he used grief as a shield and manipulated those who trusted him. Colleagues described Burr as moody, intense, and intimidating. His screen presence was undeniable, but so was the chill he cast behind the scenes. Part 23. Shelley Winters, the storm no one could calm. Shelley Winters was a powerhouse, bold, loud, and utterly unforgettable. With 2 Oscars to her name and a reputation for fearless roles, she shattered expectations of what a leading lady could be. But with that strength came a fiery temper, a refusal to compromise, and a reputation as one of the most combative actresses of her generation. Winters didn't just speak her mind. She steamrolled others with it. She interrupted directors, insulted co-stars, and had no problem throwing objects during heated arguments. She was known to explode on set, sometimes over small issues like wardrobe changes or line readings. One producer described her as an earthquake in a trench coat. She fought with nearly every director she worked with, from George Stevens to Stanley Kramer. Her emotional volatility made rehearsals unpredictable, and some actors refused to work with her more than once. Even her friends admitted she was exhausting, brilliant, but impossible to manage. In interviews, she could be brutal. She openly criticized other actresses, mocked studio executives, and once dumped a glass of ice water over the head of a talk show host who asked an insensitive question. Her memoirs were filled with barbed comments about lovers, rivals, and the entire Hollywood system. Yet Winters never apologized. She saw herself as a woman fighting for respect in a system that wanted her quiet and compliant. And she fought with every ounce of her voice, even if she burned bridges with every step. Part 24. James Cagney, the gentleman gangster with a brutal side. James Cagney was the original tough guy, the cocky, fast-talking gangster who defined a genre in classics like Public Enemy and White Heat. Off-screen, he projected an image of dignity and quiet class. But those who worked with him knew another side, a hyper-controlling, cold, and ruthless professional who would cut you off the moment you became inconvenient. Cagney demanded total precision on set. He memorized every cue, every camera angle, and expected others to keep up. If you missed a mark or fumbled a line, you'd receive no second chance. Co-stars, particularly those early in their careers, described feeling intimidated and humiliated in his presence. He had no tolerance for incompetence or personality. Behind his famous composure was a man utterly allergic to collaboration. Cagney distrusted nearly everyone, producers, writers, even his own agents. He frequently walked out of contracts, sued studios over creative control, and blacklisted people who dared to challenge his authority. His 1936 lawsuit against Warner Bros., while a landmark moment for actors' rights, also painted him as someone who would scorch the earth to get his way. Though not openly cruel, Cagney was emotionally distant and often dismissive. He believed in hard work and discipline, but not in empathy. His sets were silent, efficient, and cold. For all his charm, Cagney never cared about being liked. He wanted respect, and if you didn't give it to him, you vanished. Part 25. Fredric March, the respected thespian with a dark undercurrent. Fredric March was long hailed as a gentleman of the stage and screen. Two-time Academy Award winner, revered Broadway actor, and one of the few who transitioned smoothly between Hollywood and high art. But buried beneath that refined reputation was a troubling history that many in the industry quietly condemned. March wasn't just difficult, he was a man whose past affiliations raised disturbing questions. In the 1920s, March was a founding member of a university fraternity organization at the University of Wisconsin that was later revealed to have operated under the name Ku Klux Klan. Though March later claimed he was unaware of its racist implications at the time, many found the explanation lacking, especially given how long the organization remained active under that name. Decades later, this connection would resurface and spark fierce debate about how much March really knew, and whether he ever truly reckoned with it. Professionally, March was meticulous to the point of tyranny. He had strict rules for how scenes should be lit, staged, and performed, and had no qualms about overriding a director's authority if he felt it compromised his performance. He was known to freeze out co-stars who didn't meet his intellectual standards, and would occasionally force casting changes if he disliked a colleague's working style. To younger actors, March was cold and intimidating. To women on set, he was distant and often dismissive. His intellect was razor-sharp, but so was his disdain. Fredric March may have worn the mask of the refined artist, but many who worked beneath him walked away with stories far less noble than the legacy he left behind.